Let's go over how to apply a pose effect selectively to a person plus a 3D object. To apply a pose effect to both a person and an object, leaving the background untouched, we can't rely on just the built-in segmentation textures because those are for like the person, the face, the sky, etc. For the 3D object, we actually need to create our own. And this might sound a little complicated, and there are lots of steps, but we're going to take it nice and easy and check our output at each step along the way so that we can get this effect working. Now, the first step is to set up essentially a green screen. So I'm going to create a new render target, and I'm going to call this chroma key. And this is what we are going to output our object onto with a green screen, and we'll later use that to create a mask. Now, to see what I'm doing, I'm going to come to the scene config and change the live target to the chroma key. And we're going to be doing this quite frequently, changing this. The live target is just what we see here. The capture target is what actually gets recorded. We'll set that at the very end. All right, so we have our new render target, and we're going to create a new camera. Now I'm going to go ahead and rename this camera to chroma cam. And with my camera selected, I want to click on this layers. I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to rename this to chroma. And I want to click this color dot, and I'm just going to choose green just to help me keep things organized. Then I'll make sure that is selected, and I'll deselect the default layer. I just want this one layer. And for my render target, I'm going to output to the chroma key. And now we shouldn't really see anything going on because so far we just have our camera. We haven't added any 3D objects. So the next step is to import your 3D object. Now for this tutorial, I'm just going to come to the asset library and find a hat. I'll grab this birthday hat and go ahead and import that. So I've added my head binding, but by default, it was added to this original camera. Now we're not going to touch this camera yet, but I do need to move these effects down into my chroma camera. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete this face occluder because this birthday hat comes with one. Now, if you're importing your own object, you probably want to keep it. Got my hat. I'm going to put it under the head binding. Now, you won't see anything in the preview panel because I'm going to select the first item, hold down the shift key, click on the last one, change this layer to chroma. Now we have our hat. Now it looks like it is placed off just a little bit. So I'm just going to grab it, drag it up. Let's change the preview. So just make sure everything is lined up. And we have our hat set up. So with every 3D object you have, just go ahead and do that. Make sure it's on the correct layer inside your chroma cam. If you have your scene config set, everything should be looking fine. All right, so once we have our 3D model all placed as we want, I'm going to select the camera. I'm going to change the clear color option to color. And I'm going to click here and I'm going to choose green. Now, if I add this 255 value here, we see we get the green. Now, technically, the alpha channel is 0. As you can see, we don't need to set it, but I like to set it so that this little icon here shows the correct color. All right, so here is our green screen. Now, if your object is green, you can always choose a different color. Just choose something that's not in your object. And we are going to be looking for an exact color because it's an artificial green screen. We aren't going to have like spillover or anything. So just choose a color that's not in your object and remember what your red, green, and blue values are because we'll need those later. The next step is to create our mask. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse this chroma cam and I'm going to create a new render target. I'm going to rename this to mask and I'm going to go ahead and create a new camera. Create a camera. I'm going to rename this to mask cam. I'm going to set the render target to mask. Make sure my scene config, switch that over to mask. And then on our camera, we want a new layer. I'm going to create a new layer. Make sure it's the active one. Let's name this mask. Let's change the color to black because masks are black and white images. Then the last thing we want to do is I want this to be an orthographic camera because we're going to be working with screen images. All right, so we have our mask camera. Let's go ahead and get our mask set up. First thing I want to do is add a screen image. Now that may or may not create a new orthographic camera. If it does, just drag this full frame region into your mask camera. You can delete the orthographic camera. I'm going to rename this image to my object mask. And I'm going to set the layer to mask layer. And I'll just set the stretch mode to stretch. So we have kind of our placeholder image. Let's go ahead and take our green screen with our object and turn that into a mask. I'm going to create a new material. I just want the graph empty. This isn't going to be a very complex material. I'm going to rename this to object mask. And I'm going to open up the graph editor. And also before we do that, actually, I'm going to select this image. I'm going to drag my material over, just so we have a preview here. All right, so we have our material. Let's go ahead and get our chroma key render target into here. I'm going to right click, select add node. I want a texture 2D parameter. Oh, not 3D. I want the 2D. All right, and I'm just going to go ahead and name this chroma input. And let's connect it here. And let's bring our chroma key texture over here. And now we have our image here. So we have our image. Now let's just turn it black and white. So that is actually going to be really easy to do. Basically, all we need to do is just check to see if our color is equal to green. And then we'll have an if else. If it is, we'll turn it black. Otherwise, we'll turn it white. So let's wire this up. So I have my textured 2D parameter going into the top input on this is equal. And then this is equal will connect to the condition. Then this if else will connect to our shader. All right, so everything went black in our preview panel. So let's come to this is equal. We are looking for the color green. This is where we need to remember our RGB values and then also the alpha channel, in this case because it's set. Let's click OK. Now, if it is green, we want that to remain black. If it is not, we want that to go ahead and turn white. So on my if else, I'm going to come over here. If you don't have the side panel, you should have a little arrow here. You can just click that. It'll pop out. I'm just going to set that to RGB. And I want this bottom one to be white. And there is a mask of our 3D object. Now, if you aren't getting the white and black portions, make sure that you've set the colors here to black and white. And then that this color here exactly matches whatever color you set for the clear color on your camera. All right, now we don't want to apply our post effect to just a 3D object. If you want to, that's cool, but I want to go ahead and add the person. I'm going to select my camera to add a screen image. I'm going to call this person mask. Change the layer. I just like to use stretch. Gonna be a problem though. Then for the texture, let's add a new segmentation texture. Let's do portrait background. Let's add that. Now we'll have the person in black, the background in white. Let's select our segmentation texture. I want to invert that so that the person is in white. This is where the effect will be applied. And we lost our object mask because we are just showing the person mask. So I'm going to select this. On the blend mode, changes to add. And there we go. So black is a value of 0, white is a value of 1. So when we add black, white images, this is what we end up with. And our mask is now complete. Now that we have our mask, let's go ahead and add our post effect in this default camera. In the scene config, I'm going to switch back to the render target. And let's select our camera and get started. Now, you might notice that our 3D object is on this chroma cam, but we're adding our post effect to this camera. So what we need to do is with our camera selected, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to enable the chroma layer. And we have our hat. So an object can only be on one layer at a time. If I were to change this, it would switch to that layer. But a camera can render objects that are on multiple layers. So we can have our object on this chroma camera so that we can get that nice green background, turn it into a mask. Then we can also, with this camera, pull the object in and have our regular background. All right, so I have my camera selected. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add a post effect. I'll do a color correction. I'm going to do the Miami one because it's a very, very bright one and it'll be very easy to tell when the background is back to normal. Now I've added this and you might notice that nothing happened to the hat. So what's going on here? So Lens Studio and then Snapchat when it's running in the app is going to start at the top and kind of step its way down through everything to render it. We have our camera. It is rendering the hat, but our hat comes down here after this post effect in a separate camera. So it's not being included in the post effect. So all you need to do is just drag this chroma camera with your object. And I want to make sure I put it up at the top. I don't want to nest it. I just want to make sure it's at the top. Oh, and I nested it just like I said you shouldn't. There we go. And now the post effect is being applied. So we just want to make sure that this object exists to feed into this camera to receive the post effect. All right, so we have our 3D object, we have our post effect, we have our mask. Let's bring it all together and bring it on home. I'm going to now create a new render target. And I'm going to name this one comp, like a composite. You can name whatever you want. And I'm going to, with nothing selected here, I'm going to add a new screen image. And that should bring in this orthographic camera. Now this camera, I'm going to select it. I'm going to switch the render target to the comp. And then in my scene config, I also want to switch that over. Now I want to go ahead and do that for the capture target as well. Now remember, this is what actually gets recorded. And in this case, we want to make sure they match. All right, so let's rename this one to the background. And let's go ahead and duplicate it. Call this one the foreground. Now the background, let's give it a texture of the device camera texture. This is just what the camera sees. And this foreground, we're going to add our render target, which has the effect, and then use our mask. Now we don't have an opacity texture directly on the images. I'm going to come in my resources panel. I'm going to add an Uber unlit. And once that adds, I'm going to rename it to, let's say, masked effect. I'll select my foreground image again. I'll drag my material here. Then if I select my material, I can add my base texture, which is going to be the render target as the post effect. I'll turn on opacity texture. I'll select that mask render target. I might see nothing happening. We need to change the blend mode to normal. And voila, we have our person with a post effect applied, our 3D object with the post effect applied, and our background is unaffected. Now, as a quick shortcut, if we turn off this orthographic camera, we can switch back to our render targets. Technically, we can select this camera here, and we can add a mask texture to the camera. And we get the same effect. I just prefer going through the orthographic camera because it gives me a little more power over the background. Because here we're masking the camera, so this is just going to be whatever the camera sees. Whereas if we go with this orthographic camera approach, I could actually set up a separate camera, render target layer, etc. To do something cool with the background and then just set it as the texture here. Now, that's just a personal preference as far as setting things up.